Welcome to Audiorama Onda Lectora. Make yourself comfortable, listen, and enjoy The Key to Success by Russell H. Conwell, Audiobook Edition.
Chapter 1. Observation, the Key to Success. Years ago we went up the Ganges River in India. I was then a traveling correspondent, and we visited Agra, the sacred city of northern India, going from there to the Taj Mahal. We then hired a yoke of oxen, in order to take us across country 22 miles, to visit the summer home of Akbar, the great Mughal of India. It is a wonderful city, but dead. I have never regretted going through that country. What I saw and heard, gave me a story, which I have never seen in print. Harper's Magazine recently published an illustrated article about the city, so if you get the archives, you can find the story of that wonderful dead city, in Fatehpur Sikri. While we were being shown those buildings, the old guide, full of oriental wisdom, told us a tradition related to the ancient history of that place. It has often served me as an illustration of the practical ideas I wish to expound. I wrote it down in the chicken tracks of the short language, which are now difficult to decipher, but I remember the story well. It said that in that place, there was a beautiful palace before the great Mughal bought it. That earlier palace was the setting of the traditional story. In the palace there was a throne room, and at the head of that room, there was a raised platform, and on the platform, was placed the burnished gold throne. Next to the throne was a pedestal, on which rested the wonderful silver crown, which the emperor wore, when his word was to be royal law. At other times, he was no more than an ordinary citizen. But when he assumed that crown, which was silver, because then silver was worth much more than gold, his command was as absolute, as the law of the Medes and Persians. The guide said, that when the old king, who had ruled that country for many years died, he was left without heirs, leaving no one to claim that throne, nor to wear that silver crown. The people, who believed in the divine right of kings, were not willing to accept, that a person who was not born in the royal line should rule. They wasted 12 years looking for a successor, a relative of the late king. Finally, the people plunged into anarchy, business ceased, famine spread through the land, and the afflicted people turned to the astrologers, their priests, to find a king. The astrologers, who then worshipped the stars, assembled in that throne room, and, consulting their curious charts, asked the stars, "Where shall we find a successor for our king?" The stars answered them, "Look up and down your country, and when you find a man, whom the animals follow, the sun serves, the waters obey, and mankind loves, you need not ask who his ancestors were. This man will be one of the royal line, entitled to the golden throne, and the silver crown." The astrologers dispersed, and began to ask the people, "Have you seen a man whom the animals follow, the sun serves, the waters obey, and mankind loves?" They received only mockery. At last, in his travels, an old and gray astrologer found the way deep into the Himalayan mountains. He was surprised by a December storm, and sought refuge in a hunter's hut, on the side of a mountain. That night, as he lay awake, weeping for his suffering and dying people, he suddenly heard the howl of a wild beast, coming down the valley. He listened as it approached. He detected the purr of the hyena, the hiss of the tiger and the howl of the wolf. In a moment or two, those wild animals sniffed the log walls, between which lay the astrologer. Frightened, he got up to close the window, in case they jumped out where the moonlight was coming in. As he stood at the window, he saw the dark silhouette of his host, the hunter, descending the ladder from the loft to the ground. The astrologer saw the hunter approaching the door, as if he was about to open it and go out. The astrologer jumped forward, and said to him, "Don't open that door. There are tigers, panthers, hyenas, and wolves out there." The hunter replied, "Lie down in peace, my friend. These are acquaintances of mine." He threw open the door, and in came the tiger, the panther, the hyena, and the wolf. The hunter, as he walked to the corner of his hut, lowered from a rope, which hung along the wall, the dried herbs, which he had gathered last autumn. He had become aware that these herbs served as antidotes for poisoned wild animals. These poisoned animals, from afar, had sniffed the antidote, and had gathered at his door. When he opened the door, they followed him to the corner of the hut, at peace with each other, out of their common distress. He gave each the antidote for which he had come, and each licked his hand gratefully, and went harmlessly out the door. Then, the hunter closed the door after the last, and went to rest as if nothing extraordinary had happened. This is the fabulous tradition, as it was told to me. When the old astrologer lay down on his carpet, after the animals had left, he said to himself, "The animals follow him." And then he caught the message of the stars, and expressed, "Maybe this hunter is the king," but on second thoughts he said, "Oh, no, he is not a king. How would he look on a golden throne and with a silver crown, that ignorant man of the mountains, with the horns in his hand? He is not the king." The next morning it was cold and they wanted a fire, so the hunter went outside, and gathered some leaves and sticks. He put them in the center of the hut, on the first floor. He then pulled back a curtain that hid a crystal installed on the roof, which he had placed there when he realized that the crystal concentrated the sunlight on a specific point on the ground. Then the astrologer saw that, as that point of light approached the leaves and the sticks with the sunrise, the sticks began to crackle. Then, the leaves began to curl up, small spirals of smoke arose, and a flame was lit. As the astrologer gazed at the rising flame, he said to himself, "The sun has kindled his fire. The sun serves him, and the animals followed him last night. After all, he may be the king." But on second thoughts, he said to himself again, "Oh, he is not the king, for, how would I, with all my inherited nobility, with all my wealth, cultivation, and education, look like an ordinary citizen of a kingdom, of which this ignorant fellow was king? It is much more likely to be me." A little later, the astrologer desired water to drink. He went to the hunter, and the latter said to him, "There is a spring in the valley where I drink." So the astrologer went to the spring. But the wind blew and stirred up the shallow water, so that he could not drink. The hunter said, "Is that spring rebellious? I will teach him a lesson." Going to another corner of his hut, he took down a flask of oil that he had collected himself, and going down to the spring with the flask of oil, he dropped the oil on the waters. Sure enough, the surface of the spring became placidly beautiful. When the astrologer dipped his glistening bowl into the sparkling stream, and partook of its refreshing draught, he felt within himself the testimony, "This is the king, for the waters obey him." But again he hesitated, and said, "I hope it is not the king." The next day they went up into the mountains, and there was a dam holding back, up the valley, a great reservoir of water. The astrologer said, "Why is there a dam here without a mill?" And the hunter said, "A few years ago I was in the plains, and people were dying for lack of water. My heart, I felt sorry for the suffering and dying humanity, and when I came back here I realized." I can stop here in this story, and underline this sentence. He said, "When I came back here I realized." This is the infallible secret of success. I wish you to be happy. I wish you to be powerful forces of God and man. I wish you to have good houses, and good libraries and money invested, and here is the only road open to them. Only by this road have men traveled, who have achieved great success. The hunter said, "When I came back here, I noticed a rock hanging on the mountainside. I realized that it could easily come loose, and that it would form an excellent anchor in the narrow valley, for a prey. I realized that a small dam here would hold back a large body of water on the mountain. I dropped the boulder, filled in for the dam, and collected the water. Now, every hot summer day, I go out and dig a little more out of the dam, and so keep the water running down the river, during the hot season. Then, when autumn comes, I fill up the dam again, and collect the water for the next year's supply. Hearing this, the astrologer turned to the hunter, and said to him, "Does the mankind of the plains know that you are their benefactor?" "Yes," he replied, "they have discovered it. Not long ago I was there, selling the furs I had taken in winter, and they came around me, kissed me, embraced me, and beset me with their tokens of gratitude. I will never go down to the plains again." When the astrologer heard that mankind loved him, the 4 conditions were filled. He fell to his knees, took the horny hand of the hunter, looked at his scarred face and said, "You are a king born in the royal line. The stars told us, that when we found a man, whom the animals would follow, the sun would serve, the waters would obey and mankind would love, he would be the rightful heir to the throne, and you are that man." But the hunter said, "Me a king? Oh, I am not a king. My grandfather was a peasant." The astrologer said, "Don't talk about your grandfather. That has nothing to do with it. The stars have told us, you are the man." The hunter replied, "How could I rule a nation without knowing anything about law? I have never studied law." Then the astrologer cut short the whole discussion, with a theological sentence, quoted from the ancient sacred books, which I will give in a very literal translation. "Let not him whom the stars command to rule, dare to disobey their divine decree." I will now put it in a slightly more modern phrase, never refuse a nomination. When the hunter heard that very wise decision, he consented to be led to the valley of Juna, and to the beautiful palace. There he was clothed in purple. Then, amidst the acclamation of the happy and hopeful people, they placed on his forehead the insignia of royal authority, the silver crown. For 40 years, the old guide told us, he ruled the nation and led it to a peace and prosperity, such as it had never known before, nor has it enjoyed since. That wonderful tradition, so full of illustrative force, has remained with me all the years since. When I look for a man for a great work, I look for one who meets these 4 characteristics. If he does not have all 4, he must have some of them, or else he will be of little use in modern civilization. Chapter 2. True Leaders. Among all of you who read this book, I look for kings and queens. I am looking for the successful men and women of the future. No matter how old you are, you still have life ahead of you. I am looking for the leading men and women, and I will find them with these 4 tests. It cannot fail, it is infallible. Some men, intensely American, will say, "Oh, we have no kings and queens in this country." Have you ever observed that America is ruled by the smallest number of people of any known nation on earth? And that same small number will rule it when we add all the women, as we will soon do, to the voting population. America is ruled by very few kings and queens. The reason we are ruled by so few is because our people are generally intelligent. Oh, you will ask, you mean the rule of the political boss? Yes. It is not a good word, because it is misleading. America is ruled by bosses, anyway, and will be as long as we are a free people. We do not approve of certain phases of boss rule, so don't misunderstand me, when I state that very few people rule the American people. For example, in my hometown, Philadelphia, nearly 2 million people are governed by 4 or 5 men. It will always be like that. It all depends on whether those 4 or 5 men are fit for the position of leaders or not. If they are wise and good men, then that is the best kind of government. Of that there is no doubt. If all, the 80 or 90 million people of the United States, were compelled to vote on every little thing the government does, it would take a long time to make any reform. A smart farmer would build a house. As a farmer, will he set to work and cut the lumber himself, plane it and shape it? Will he be the architect of the house, drive all the nails, lay the shingles and build the chimney himself? If he is a smart man, he will hire a carpenter, an architect and a mason who know their trade, and tell them to supervise that work for him. In an intelligent country, we can hire men who understand the state, the law, social economics, who love justice. We hire them as qualified people, to do what we are not capable of doing. Why should all the people be all the time meddling in something they do not understand? They hire people who do understand it, and consequently, in a free nation, only a few people, specially trained, will be allowed to lead. They will be the people who know better than we do, what to do in difficult or important circumstances. You are governed by a few people, and I look for these few people among my readers. There are some women in this country, who now have more influence than any known statesman, and their names are hardly mentioned in the newspapers. I remember once, in the days of Queen Victoria, asking a university class, "Who rules England?" Of course, they answered, "Queen Victoria." Did Queen Victoria rule England? During her nominal reign, England was the freest country on the face of the earth, and America not half as free, if we go to extremes of comparison. She was only a figurehead, and did not even express an opinion on the Boer War. Everything was left to the statesmen, who in reality, had been elected by Parliament to govern. They were the real rulers. I look for the real kings, not the nominal ones, and I will find the successful men and women of the future, by the 4 tests mentioned, in the ancient tradition of the silver crown. The first one is, the animals will follow them. If tomorrow a dog or a cat is on your heels, remember what I write here. It is a test of royalty or kingship. If you don't have a cat, a dog, an ox or a horse that loves you, then I pity you. I pity the animal more, but you are also an object of pity. Is there no inferior animal that loves to hear your footsteps, that whines at your heels, or wags its tail or shakes its head at your door? Is there no cat that loves to see you come in when the house is empty? Is there no faithful dog that gets up and barks with joy, when it hears your key in the door? If you have none, it is high time you got one, because one of the important paths to great success, is along the lines of what animal life can give us, of instruction and encouragement. The time has come, when a dog should be worth at least $1,000. The time has come, when a horse that now trots a mile in 2 minutes, should trot a mile in 55 seconds. That is scientifically possible. Now, where are your deacons, and your elders and your class leaders, who have not a horse in your city, which trots a mile in 55 seconds? Oh, some good pious brother will say, I don't pay any attention to trotting horses. I am too religious to spend time on them. Is that so? Who created the trotting horse? Who used the most picturesque language on the face of the earth, in the book of Job, to describe it? Did you ever own a trotting horse? Did you ever see a beautiful animal so well fed, so well cared for, quivering in that line with his mane waving, his eyes shining, his nostrils distended, and his whole being alert for the leap? Did you hear the shot and see him go? If you did and did not love him, you should be thrown out of the church. The time has come when a horse can be as useful as a university. One day, at Yale University, I heard a professor of science explain to some boys that a horse harbors in its body a large amount of electrical force, produced incessantly by vital activities. If that electricity could be concentrated and retained at a specific point, a horse could remain motionless, and run an electric motor of 40 horsepower. He further advanced his assertion, by mentioning that a human being harbors within his body, in its living state, a significant amount of electricity, generated constantly. If this electricity could be brought to a certain point, it would allow him to remain immobile, and run an electric motor, of 10 horsepower. I left that classroom with a sense of triumph, thinking, after all, the idlers who stand on street corners and smoke are going to be good for something. Some years ago, in Europe, a revolutionary sewing machine was designed, in which a lady placed her bare feet, and by means of her electric force, set the machine in motion. However, this force was still not enough to operate the machine with the necessary intensity, as to drive the needle and achieve a real seam. The only question is to get more of that lady's electricity, through the machine, and ensure the most power. So if a young man wants a valuable wife, he must marry one, full of lightning. The instant when all the motive power of the world, can come from animal life, is about to come. When I finally sedate that extra step, the giant airships will take flight, and carry with them a lap dog. The airship will need no coal, no oil, but only the electric power of that lap dog. And if they rise high enough to feed that dog, it will provide the energy to run the engines. The great seas of the air will be filled with machines driven by lapdogs, or by the electricity of the aviator himself. It is not so far off as many of you suppose, and it is the most necessary improvement of this time, not so much for war as for peace. The time has come when an old hen may become a great instructor of the world. I would rather send my child to an old hen, than to any teacher I have ever seen in my life. That old hen that scratches around your door, or clucks by your fence, or plucks your flowers, knows more about some things, than any scientific professor on the face of the earth. I wish I knew what that old hen does. But there are some professors, who pretend to have a wonderful intellect, who say, I graduated at Leipzig, or Oxford, or Harvard, and I have no time to observe a hen. You don't have time to watch a chicken. My friend, did you ever try to talk to her? No, I didn't, she has no language. Didn't you ever hear her call the hens and see them coming? Didn't you ever hear her scold the rooster and see him go away? Well, the hen has a real language, and it's about time you science teachers understand what that old woman says. But, says the teacher, I have no time to be with a hen. They are always around, although I never notice them. I'm studying the most important things in the world. Won't you come into my study for a moment, Professor, and let me examine you? You've examined the boys enough, now let me examine you. Bring everything you know of science, and all the scientific applications that have been made, and all the instruments that have been used, bring everything the world has ever discovered of chemistry. Come, and take in your hand a pigeon egg, just the egg. Now, Professor, will you tell the person who is reading this book where, in this egg, is now the beating heart of the future bird? Can you tell where it is? Oh no, I can't tell you that. I can tell you the chemistry of the egg. No, I'm not looking for that. I'm looking for the design of the egg. I'm looking for something more divinely mysterious than anything in chemistry. Now, Professor, could you tell me where in that egg is the bony framework, which will appear next? No, I can't tell you that. Where is the shining breast, and where are the wings that will welcome the sun on its arrival? No one can tell, says the professor. The professor is right. It cannot yet be known. However, in that egg is the greatest scientific problem, with which the world has ever grappled, the beginning of life, and the God-given design. In that egg is the secret of life. Professor, tell me where this life begins. The professor says, no man can answer questions like that. So, until we can answer, we must take off our hats every time we meet a laying hen. Because that old woman knows by instinct, more than any of us. She knows directly, through her instinctive nature from God, something about the beginnings of life, that we cannot yet understand. The last time I saw Dr. Oliver Wendell Holmes, the great Massachusetts poet, he asked me to go out into his backyard, and look at his chickens. He told me they would answer to his names. But it turned out that they were like our children, and would not show off for company. But I have no doubt, that those chicks that were still with the hen, responded to their individual names when she called them. I am sure that the great man understood the hen and the chickens as well as Darwin understood the pigeons. It was a wonderful thing for science, that men like Holmes and Darwin, could learn so much from the hen. It reminds me of a current event in the life, of Dr. Holmes himself, although the biographies do not seem to have taken it into account. He and Mr. Longfellow, were very close friends. They were always joking with each other like two children, always playing when they met. It is said that one day, Dr. Holmes asked Mr. Longfellow to go to Bridgewater, in Massachusetts, to a poultry show. And he decided to go, for he was very interested in chickens. Those two great poets went to the poultry exhibition, and as they walked down the central aisle, among the exhibits of hens and chickens, they came to a large poster, on which was a drawing of a rooster. He had his wings spread and his mouth open, addressing a speech to a bunch of little hens. It was such a singular picture, that Mr. Longfellow caught the eye of Dr. Holmes, and said, "So, you love chickens, you understand them. What do you suppose a rooster says, in giving such a speech as that to some hens?" They went on, and Dr. Holmes was studying him. At last he turned and said, "Go on, I'll catch up with you." He went back to that sign, climbed up on a chair, removed the tacks from the top, turned over the advertisement at the top, above the picture. Then he took his pencil, and drew a line, from the beak of the rooster who was making that speech, to the top. There he wrote, what he thought the rooster was saying to those hens. They say that he did not make a single correction, neither of line nor of word. He then went in search of Mr. Longfellow, and brought the great poet to see the sign. He had written these words, in imitation of Psalm of Life, Longfellow's, "Life is real, life is sincere. And the shell is not the plumage, you are an egg and as an egg you shall remain." It was not about the chicken. Art is vast, and time fleeting. Sharpen our banknotes well, and do not leave them as silenced drums, inside the shell. In the vast battlefield of the world, in the great barnyard of life, don't be like those lazy cattle, like a rooster in the fight. The lives of roosters remind us all, we can make our lives sublime, and as we depart, leave behind us rooster footprints, in the sands of time. Those footprints of roosters, that may be some other rooster, under the rain fall, some helpless brother with a rooster beak, seeing them, will sing again. Animal life can teach us a lot if we study it, if we observe it day by day in our homes, in the streets, wherever we are. Chapter 3. The Dominion of Natural Forces. Science has shown that the mentality and disposition of all classes of animal life are greatly affected by what they eat. Professor Virchow, of Germany, took 2 kittens and fed them on different foods, but kept them in the same environment. At the end of 3 months, he approached one of those kittens, and put his finger on the sore. The kitten raised its back, spat, scratched and bled. It was wild. He extended his finger to the other kitten, fed the other food, and it rubbed against his finger and purred, with all the beauty of domestic peace. What was the difference between the kittens? Nothing in the world, except what they ate. Now I understand why some men swear, and some women scratch. It's because of what they eat. The universities of the world are establishing schools of domestic science, for the purpose of training people to understand the chemistry of digestion and the chemistry of cooking. Oh, there is a terrible need for better cooks. Yet, the aristocratic American lady of fashion thinks it is utterly beneath her dignity to bake a pie or a pudding or boil potatoes. What a lack of vision! The need for better cooks is great. How many men fail in business because their wife is a bad cook? How many students fail because of bad cookies in the boarding house? And how many graves in that cemetery would be empty if there had been a good cook in that house? I've just dealt with a horrible issue now, the need for better cooks. A man can't even be merciful to dyspepsia. A woman who delegates the cooking to someone who is ignorant of culinary duties, while she busies herself with lace work and embroidery in the parlor, does not deserve the title of American lady. Any fool could sit between the curtains, but it takes a giant mind to handle the chemistry of the kitchen. If women abandon that throne of power, men must occupy it, or our civilization will cease. But I will not follow this thought until the thousands of discoveries suggested by animals. For, in this wonderful tradition, the true king was not only followed by the animals, but the souls served him, and the waters obeyed him. Now I can combine these two thoughts to illustrate them, using the marvelous locomotive, which pulls our railroad trains. The locomotive carries in its interior the coal, which is the carbon of the sun. Thus, the sun serves man by heating the water, and there is the water turning into steam, and driving the piston rods over the earth, obeying man. We need so much, to travel faster than we do now. Not long ago I saw a man saying, that he did not like to travel a mile a minute, in a railroad train. If you don't go faster than a mile a minute, 10 years from now you will feel like that old lady, who got on a slow train with a little girl. The conductor passed by and asked for a ticket for the little girl, and the old lady said, she is too little to pay for the ticket. No, said the conductor. Such a big girl should pay for her ticket. Well, replied the mother, she was young enough, not to pay anything when we got on this train. You will feel like that, if 10 years from now, you do not travel more than a mile a minute. The time will soon come when, to go from Philadelphia to San Francisco, you will get into the end of a pipe or on a wire, and as fast as you can say it, you will be in San Francisco. Is that an extravagant expression? The time is coming when you won't say it's a fancy expression. As I write this, a company is being formed, to lay that pneumatic tube from New York to Boston, long contemplated. They have been fighting in the courts for the right to lay it. When they finish it, it will be possible to place a 100-pound load on the New York end, and it will possibly land in Boston, in 1 minute and 50 seconds. Now, what is there to prevent making a pipe a little larger, putting a man in, and sending it in 1 minute and 50 seconds? The only reason why it cannot be sent, with that lightning speed, is for the same reason, perhaps, that was given by the Irishman, when he fell from a tall building and was asked, didn't the fall hurt? No, it was not the fall that hurt me, it was the stopping so fast. That is all the difficulty there is, in using those pneumatic tubes now, for human displacement. We need those inventions now, and we shall soon find the inventors that will we find them graduates of some university, or some great scientific school at Harvard, Yale, Oxford, or Berlin. Maybe. I would not say, as long as I preside over a university, that you will not find such people there, for that may be so. Let us go back in time together, and observe where these men and women are to be found. Travel to the north of England, and go down 2 miles, through a subway coal pit, where you will find a young man, pulling out a layer of coal, 1.5 feet thick. His hair is sticking out of his hat, his face is blotchy and his fingers are covered with soot. Yet, he's still digging and whistling. Is he a king? One of the greatest the world has ever seen. Queen Victoria, in presenting her son, who has since become king, to that young man, said to him, I present to you my son, the greatest man in England. How, this poor miner, who had only gone to school a few months in his life. Although he had not attended a day school, he had been learning all the time, in the University of Experience, in the great university of the world, daily observation. When such a man graduates, he gets the highest possible degree, he needs no recommendations. Let us go into the mine, and ask the miner his name. Young man, what is your name? Stevenson. The inventor of the locomotive itself. Oh, where are your kings, oh, men? They may be in the mine, in the mountain, in the hovel or in the palace, wherever a man observes what others have not seen. Wherever a man observes in his daily work, what other people have not noticed, there the king will be found. Are any of my readers milkmen? Are they discouraged when the streams freeze over in winter? Now, there was a milkman in West Virginia, not many years ago, who went to the train every morning with the milk from the farm, and as they put the milk in the wagon, he studied the locomotive standing at the station. What do you know about a locomotive? Oh, I don't know anything about it. Is it so? You have seen them and ridden after them all your life, and you have seen them standing in the station, you have looked at the huge structure with a certain respect, but you know nothing about it, and then you expect to be a successful man. That young man was interested in the locomotive, and as he stood there he watched it, measured it, asked the engineer questions about it. One day, the engineer, seeing his interest, took him to the switch and taught him how to turn on the steam, how to turn it off, how to reverse, how to ring the bell, how to blow the whistle and everything else. He went home, and in the evenings he drew pictures of the locomotive. 2 years later, the same train passed the siding. Then the engineer and the stoker went to breakfast at a house, leaving the locomotive alone, waiting for them to remove the snow from the track, which had rolled down the mountain. While they were away, a valve on the locomotive was accidentally opened. The piston was started, and the locomotive began to pull the train onto the main track, and then began to descend the dreaded slope, at full speed. The brakeman stepped out onto the rear platform, and grabbed the wheel brake to slow the train. When he saw the engineer and the stoker at the top of the hill, waving their arms as if something terrible had happened, the brakeman shouted, "Up there are the engineer and the fireman, both of them. They're going to kill us all." People fainted and screamed, and the scream spread to the second car, and then to the baggage car, and that milkman was there. He ran to the side door to jump, but saw that it would be certain death. So, with the help of the baggage hand, he climbed up the tender, reached the engineer's station, and looked for the lever in the smoke. When he found it, he pulled it. Then he reversed the engine. It was a miracle that those cylinder heads held. But with a blood-curdling crunch, the driving wheels stopped on the track, spewing fire through the snow, as they began to back up against the moving train, with the momentum still pushing them. It shook the train, until it broke all the glass. When the train stopped, the passengers got off to check who had done it. They discovered that the young man had done it, who had saved their lives, and they thanked him with tears. A shareholder of the railroad company, an old man of almost 80 years, was traveling on the train. That night he came to the shareholders' meeting and told the story of his narrow escape on that train. Since then, that milkman is one of the richest railroad owners in the world. What do you think has become of the other milkmen, who went at the same time to the same place, and sat on the edge of the platform and swung their feet? What will have become of them? Ask the winds that come down from the Allegheny Mountains, where are the other milkmen? The winds will answer, they're going to the pump, they're still. It was always the same. Whichever way you look at it, success in any branch of accomplishment depends on this ability to get one's education every day on the fly, from the events that surround us now. The king is there, where a person realizes that which other men do not see. Chapter 4. Who will humanity love? Great men of science, and we need more, often do not get all the credit due to them, because they have not graduated somewhere. There seems to me to be a feeling in these latter days, of creating an aristocracy among men, who have graduated from some rich university. But that does not determine a man's life. It may be a silly tyranny for a while, but nevertheless, every man and woman must eventually take the place where he and she are best qualified to be. As well as doing the things he and she can do best, and the things he and she really know about. Where they graduated from, or at what time, will not count for long in the career of practical life. We need great scientists, now more than ever. Where will we find them? We will not find them where that scientific man came from, who invented an improvement of the cuckoo clock. His clock, instead of saying, "Cuckoo, cuckoo," when it struck the hour, it said, "I love you, I love you." That man left the clock at home with his wife at night, while he was out and about at the club, thinking that would be enough protest of his love. However, any man knows, you cannot make love with machinery. That was nothing more than a supposedly scientific idea. I read not long ago, that a great scientific man said that, love and worship, are only the aggregate results of physical causes. That is not true. Love and worship are something beyond physical causes. Educated men should know better than anyone else to say something like that. There are many valuable things that every man knows, until he has unlearned them in a university. There is a danger that a man may receive so much education, that he may know nothing of real value, because his useless education has driven the useful out of his mind. It is like a dog I had when I was a boy. He was a very good fox dog. One day, it occurred to me to show him off to the kids. We let the fox out at the barn door, which was open just wide enough, so that the dog could see the fox come out. Then he started whimpering and howling to get out. I ran out and dropped some red pepper, where the dog would probably follow the fox down the hill. Then I went back and opened the door. The dog ran out after the fox, but soon began to ingest the red pepper. Then he began to whine and howl, and stopped, turned around, and running towards the stream, stuck his nose under the water. From the moment when he graduated from that pepper college, he never wanted to follow a fox again. He had added education in the wrong direction, and so it is often with these scientific men. Do you know that the humblest man, whatever his occupation, really instinctively knows certain things better, for not having gone much to school. It is very easy to bias the mind. When a child learns geometry, the teacher says to him, 2 parallel lines will never pass together. The child may look up and ask, what are you telling me that for? Everyone knows that 2 parallel lines never run together. But how does he know that? He is born with it. His natural instincts tell him. It is what we call an axiom, a self-evident truth. It is above all argument, and above all possible reasoning. We know that 2 halves equal the whole. You know that when you cut an apple in half, the 2 halves are equal to the whole. You tell this to a geometry class, and they reply, I know that, everybody knows that. Of course everybody knows it, because it is a natural scientific fact, which cannot be reasonably questioned. Ask a man, do you know that you exist? He looks up in amazement and says, of course. Don't I know that I exist? Do I know that I am here, that this is me, that I am not Mrs. Smith or anyone else? Of course you know. Of course you know, but how do you know? By a God-given instinct that came into the world with you. No scientist or school on earth could disprove that, or prove it, either. It is a self-evident fact. I know that I am an intelligent personal identity, and that I inhabit this body in some mysterious way. I know it is my hand, but what I possess is not me. I know by an unerring instinct that I am a spiritual being, which is separate from this matter. You know it too. No scientist can prove or disprove it, and it is a fact we all know. I know that I can never die, and you know it too, unless you have educated yourself to it. It's in your own life, it's part of your original instinct. When some young graduate of some great university comes to you and says, I can prove to you that the Bible is not true, or says, I can prove to you that your religion is false. Then you can say to him, you are nothing but an educated fool, because the more you have studied, the less truth you seem to know. Only one's own personal self can know one's own religious instincts. Only one's own self can know whether he is in spiritual relationship with God or not. No education on earth can override the fact, though wrong study may confuse the mind. When a man comes to me with his higher education to nullify religion, I am reminded of what Artemus Ward said to that gentleman graduate of Oxford and Cambridge. This man told Ward that he was disgusted with his shows. Artemus Ward asked him, what do you know about these shows? And he replied, I know all about them. I graduated from 2 universities. Then Artemus Ward said to him, you remind me of a farmer in Maine, who had a calf that stole milk from 2 cows, and the more milk it got the bigger it got. Such is sometimes the effect of education on the religious life. The more mental education of some kind you receive, the less you can know your natural religious instincts. There is a great need today, and prayers go up to heaven now for men and women, whom mankind love because they are great benefactors. Love because, while they are making money, or gaining fame or honor for themselves, they are blessing mankind, all along the way. I must not argue now. I will illustrate, because you may remember the illustrations, and you might forget an argument. There is a great need for artists. Never was there so great a need, in the progress of Christian civilization, as there is now for great painters. All these walls should be covered with magnificent paintings, teaching some great divine truth, and every schoolhouse, yes, every barn, should have some picture to instruct and inspire. All our children try to go to the movies, and that shows the power of pictures, for the instruction of mankind. We need thousands of artists. I am not surprised that a man in New York gets a salary of $35,000 a year for working on moving pictures because he notices something that other people have not seen. I am not surprised that a big store in that city pays a publicist a salary of $21,000 a year. He can see what the rest of the public doesn't see. We need great artists, hundreds of them. Where are they going to find them? You will say, in art school, in the National Gallery in London, or in the Louvre in Paris, or in Rome. Maybe so. But it is somewhat unfortunate for your theory, that one of America's greatest painters, painted with a cat's tail. It is interesting to note, that the man who was awarded the highest prize, at the Chicago World's Fair, for his landscape painting, never received a lesson in his life, on color or drawing. But that does not argue against lessons, nor against schools or universities. Don't misunderstand me. I'm just emphasizing my special subject. He took the highest award, and he never went to an art school in his life. If he had attended school, the teacher might have tried to teach him something, and thus weaken his mind. The teacher of a school who teaches a child something which that child could solve by himself, is a curse to that child. It is an unfortunate misfortune, that a child is under the direction of an overly benevolent teacher, who teaches him everything without restraint. One of the greatest artists was Charlotte Brontë. She was a wonderful little woman, and I like little women. Have you ever read Longfellow's poem about Little Women? It always reminds me a lot of Charlotte Brontë. One day she showed me the poem, and I asked her why she didn't print it in her book, and she replied, "I don't think it's worth it." Since her death it has been given the first rank, and I will quote a verse. As in a little rose we find the richest dyes, as in a little grain of gold lies much price and value, and as from a little balm comes much scent, so in a little woman, there is a glimmer of paradise. Charlotte Brontë was one of those wonderful, wiry, and beautiful little combinations, cultivated of divine femininity, which no man can describe. She had a younger brother, and when a young lady has a younger brother, if she has a suitor, she has her hands full. This younger brother lacked mental dexterity, as well as manual skill, which made him unfit to be an artist. But his sister was determined that he should be a painter, and took him to the coast, to the village and to the woods, and told him, "Look at everything, and look at it well." Finally, he got a second prize. Then his little sister threw her arms around her brother's neck and kissed him, and thanked him for getting that prize. That's what a woman is like. I could never understand a woman. Among all the Lord's enigmatic creations, woman is the most mysterious. Charlotte Brontë was like an old woman I used to know in my hometown. This woman thanked her husband with tears, for raising a flock of sheep, which she fed herself every morning, during the winter, before he got out of bed. Eventually, Charlotte Brontë's younger brother dissipated and died, and then her father died, and when we ministers grow old, we can also die. She was left with no means of subsistence. But when she told her friends, they said, "You have a college education, Charlotte, why don't you write something?" Now we find out that the first thing she wrote was Jane Eyre, the wonderful story, for which in the end she received $38,000. Queen Victoria invited that humble girl to her palace in Windsor for her wonderful genius. How did she come to write such a book? Simply because she had been so attentive for the sake of her brother, that from the pen of her pen sprouted those beautiful descriptions, as naturally as the ripples of water flowed down the mountainside. It is always like that. No man gives himself for the good of others in the right spirit, without receiving 100 times more at this present time. I will go a little deeper into this thought. We desire great painters, but we do not long for more artists, like that man, who depicted the Israelites coming out of Egypt with muskets on their shoulders, carrying the initials of USA on their butts. But more than artists, we need great musicians. There is an enormous need for music. We have too much noise, but too little real music. Have you ever thought how little you have? Do you think a real musician is simply a man who roars up to the low B and shrieks up to the high C? What a terrible need there is for music that refines the heart, enlightens the mind, that brings glory in heaven to men. I have not space here to enlarge on this thought, the terrible need which mankind has for true music. But we do not have it. I do not know why, and I cannot explain it. But perhaps I can hint at what music is. At Yale, I had to make a living, and so, for these 44 years, I have been lecturing exclusively, in order to help young people to secure their college education. I would get up at 4 o'clock and work at the New Haven House, from 4 to 8, to get the comebacks from the breakfast table, so that my brother and I could live. Some days, however, I dug potatoes in the afternoon, and taught music in the evening, although the former was my own occupation. Sometimes my music pupils would invite me to play something to entertain their company, and I noticed that the louder I played, the louder they talked. I often said, what a low level of musical culture there is in New Haven. But I learned something when I left college. I learned that I wasn't a musician. If I had been a musician, they would have listened to me. That's the only test of real music. There is no other. If you sing and everybody whispers, or you play and everybody talks, it's because you're not a musician. I dare tell you that here, when I wouldn't dare tell you individually, if we were alone. There is no person on earth who can tell as many lies per square centimeter as someone who plays a piano. What do we call music? Music can be a totally personal matter, and be called music. I remember Major Snow, from my hometown, who used to listen to the noise of the saw in the sawmill, how it screeched and scratched, until it hurt our toes. We asked the old man why he went to the sawmill on Saturdays, when he could go any other day. He said, "Oh, you guys don't understand. When I was young I worked in a sawmill, and I come here to hear how they file the saw. It reminds me of the old days, and that's music to me." He was educated to that level, where filing a saw was music to him, and so men can be educated in all ways, in so-called music. But it is not true music. What is real music? I went to a beautiful church in New York, to exchange with the pastor, and an officer of the church came down the aisle as I was entering, and said to me, "Sir, the choir always opens the service." They did, they opened it. I sat on the pulpit couch, and waited an embarrassingly long time, for them to do something up there. The choir perched on a shelf above my head. The soprano was earning $4,000 a year, and I was anxious to hear her. Soon I heard the rustle of silk, and a giggle or two. Then the soprano began. She played the lowest note her cultivated voice could play, and then she began to meander, or rather, to make a corkscrew, going up and up and up and up, until she was out of sight, and stayed up there. Then the second bass began to go down, 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 down to the Hades of sound, and there it stayed. Was that music? Was that worship? If I had been in that sacred place, and had sworn to the people, it would have been no greater sacrilege than that display on that shelf. Do you think the living God should be worshipped by a trapeze, pyrotechnic, high-flying acoustic show? Neither worship nor music was there. The music does not consist of a high-flying circus trapeze show in acoustics. What is the nature of music? Music is a combination of sounds, which moves the heart to holier emotions, quickens the brain to brighter thoughts, and moves the whole man to nobler actions. That is music. Nothing else is music. You can only know whether you are a musician or not, by observing, as you sing, whether you hold people's attention, and whether you influence their memory, and their subsequent character. Chapter 5. Need of speakers. We need great speakers, and the need is somewhat alarming. I am often called upon to lecture, in chautauquas and lyceums, and committees often urge me, to recommend some man or woman, to take a place on the public platform. They offer wonderful rewards, to those who will do well. There are no men or women living, not a single one known in our land today, who can be called a great orator. When I began lecturing, 58 years ago, there were Henry Ward Beecher, Wendell Phillips, George William Curtis, Edward Everett, the greatest orator of his day, and John B. Goff. I consider it a great honor, to have been induced by Mr. Goff, to go on the lecture platform. They are all gone, and no successors have appeared. Freedom and oratory have always gone hand in hand, and always will, hence the need for oratory, is especially pressing now. Why do we lack orators? The publishers argue, that the newspaper has already reached every home, and a man can read in his newspaper, a better sermon, than any speech delivered. Thus, it saves the cost of the minister and the problems with the choir. However, that time will never come. You can never live without real speakers, no matter how many newspapers you have. I respect the press. I have had something to do with their work throughout my life, for I have worked for and owned a newspaper. But I must say, after all, there is something in the wag of a living man's finger, something in the flash of his eyes, something in the stamp of his feet. But much more in his magnetic power, which no cold type can ever express. You can never fully express the living man, in cold lead. Why have we no great orators? I don't think the newspapers prevent it. But other people tell me, it is the injurious effect of the modern school of elocution, which is now called school of oratory. A few years ago, all these schools of elocution changed their name to schools of oratory, and consequently, they damaged the outlook of our country. The school of elocution may not be a school of public speaking at all. It may be a hindrance to public speaking, it depends on what the teaching is. There is a great difference between elocution and true oratory. Elocution is an art of expression, which every teacher possesses, and teaches his own art. But oratory is the great science of successful speech. The man who gets what he pleads for is an orator, no matter what he calls. If you call a dog and it comes, that is oratory. If he runs away, that is elocution. Why don't we have better speakers? These schools of elocution remind me of an incident, which happened about 17 years ago. I don't think I hurt anyone's feelings by mentioning it. The elocution teacher was ill one day, and the boys came looking for me. They wanted me to go because the teacher was absent, and I resolved to go and entertain that class, and let it pass for a recitation. Teachers usually do that. As I entered the classroom, I said to the boy in the front seat, "What was the last lesson you had in elocution?" One of the boys said, "Peter Piper, pickle picker, picked 6 pickled peppers." If Peter Piper, pickle picker, picked 6 pickled peppers, where are the 6 pickled peppers that Peter Piper picked? That's called lip exercise in elocution. I said to that young man, "I'm not going to teach elocution. But I'd like you to come up and say that to this class, as you would before an audience. The boy came up, and put the tips of his toes together, and his hands at his sides, for he had not come to the study of gesture. He shouted very fast and loud, "Peter Piper, pickle picker, picked 6 pecks of pickled peppers. If Peter Piper, pickler, picked 6 pecks of pickled peppers, where are the pickled peppers that Peter Piper picked?" It was elocution, but not oratory. I had a hard time getting another guy up, but in the end I got it. He thought oratory consisted entirely of elocutionary inflections, so he pronounced it, "Peter Piper picked 6 pecks of pickled peppers. If Peter Piper picked 1 peck of pickled peppers, where is the peck of pickled peppers that Peter Piper picked?" It sounded like an old rooster in the barn in the morning. But being elocution, it was not oratory. But the most illustrative, and most absurd speech I ever heard in my life, was that of a visitor to that class that day. I was sitting near the aisle, and one of the students came up, and whispered to me, "That young man has graduated, in an Oriental school of elocution, and he is going to play on the stage, the heaviest roles in tragedy. He is a great elocutionist, and won't you have him recite something to the class?" I fell into the trap. I went up to the young man, and said, "I understand you are an elocutionist, that will you go up and recite something for the class?" As soon as he looked at me, I saw from his eyes that something was going on in his head. I don't know exactly what, but since then things have happened, which make it not impolite to refer to him, the way I do. I said to him, "Please, go up and recite something," and he replied, "Shall I recite the same as the others?" I said, "You need not do so, take anything." He put down his golden-headed staff, the best thing about him, on the floor, and then he went up to the platform, leaned on the table, and said to me, "Shall I recite the same as the others?" I said, "You may do so if you wish, you are perfectly free to take what you like. The teacher is away. When the cat is away, the mice will play." Then he began to prepare for that recitation. I had never seen such behavior in my life. He rolled up his sleeves, combed his hair back, shook himself, moved the table forward, and I slid back by the door, and left the dais open, for I did not know what he was going to do next. Then he gave the selection, "Peter Piper picked a peck of pickled peppers. If Peter Piper, picked a peck of pickled peppers, where is the peck of pickled pepper that Peter Piper picked?" He rolled in a flutter the letter R on each line. The class looked at him in amazement and clapped, until he repeated it. It was still elocution, but it was not oratory. He thought oratory consisted of rolling the R's and rolling himself. That's not oratory. Where do they learn oratory? They learn it in the old-fashioned school, from that old hen at the kitchen door, in some office, in some hall or in some church, where young men and women meet and debate. There they naturally say the things they want to say, and then take note of the effects of what they debate, the conviction or subsequent action, of those who listen. That is the place to observe. You must pay attention, if you want to be a great speaker. The greatest speaker of the future will be a woman. It has not been 2 months since the management of a female Chautauqua said, "We could give $40,000 a year to any woman, who is a natural woman on the platform. They would make money with $40,000 a year, if they hired a woman, who was a real woman." The problem is, when women get on the platform, they try to sing low, or they try to talk like a man talks. And now there is so much need for women speakers. Why isn't there a great woman speaker like Mrs. Livermore, now that there is such a need? Chapter 6. The Influence of Women. If women vote, they will be of little importance unless they are leaders. It is no special advantage to the voter, to ignorantly put a piece of paper in a ballot box. But it is very important to influence 10,000 votes. That is what women must do, if they are to exercise their right of suffrage. They must be the influence behind the throne, not merely a voter. When I was a boy in the district school, a substitute teacher came, and we all loved that little woman. We did everything she asked us to do. One day that substitute teacher, who couldn't get a first-class certificate, copied a line from a poem, and asked me to read it. If the swift fleet of the ocean you cannot sail, and the mighty waves you cannot rock, smile at the storms you meet. He asked me to read it once, and then he turned the paper over and said, "Now, Russell, say it again." I said, "I didn't learn it by heart." She said, "Don't learn it by heart. I'll try it again." So she wrote the second verse. "If you're too weak to travel, up the steep and high mountain." Then she said to me, "Now, Russell, read it once, and look closely at every word, and don't look at a word a second time." I don't know now why he demanded that of me. I have looked in many books on psychology, and in many places to find out. I have no explanation for this, and I ask you to think for me, for this is the fact. I took the second verse, and read it just as she had told me. Then she turned it over, and said to me, "Please, repeat it." I said, "I can't repeat it, I haven't memorized it." She said, "Don't repeat it again. Close your eyes and make a mental effort to see those verses, and then read it." I closed my eyes and said, "Oh, it's all dark." Then she looked very disturbed and said, "Now, Russell, don't say that. Aren't you going to try to do what I'm asking you to do?" I thought the little woman was going to cry, so I said, "Yes, I'll do my best." She said, "Close your eyes again and make a determined effort, with your eyes closed, to see that poetry as if it were in front of you." I closed my eyes and made that effort, and I saw it as clearly as if I had held it before my open eyes. As long as I had my eyes closed I could see the two verses, and I read it all the way through, word for word, and I read it backwards, word for word, to the beginning. I thought I had seen a ghost. I went home and told my father what had happened, and he ran down from the meadow to the school, and said to the teacher, "If you fall back into your silly superstitions, you will never teach in that school again." It must have been uncomfortable for her, and her secret went to the grave with her, as far as I know. However, what I would not give to be able to put before the world now, what that woman knew. All our educational institutions, for which I have worked all these years, would be nothing compared to that one secret, if I could give it to you. The secret of being able to contemplate a scene, close your eyes and look at it again, study it in detail. I have had no great personal power in that line. But I have seen a man, who would take a column from the morning paper, and read it, then pass the paper to me, and read it with his eyes closed without hardly making a mistake. I don't know if I ever saw anyone who was infallible, but he rarely made a mistake. He could often tell me where the comma, semicolon, and other punctuation marks were. I don't think there is a normal child, who is not mentally capable of that power, if he has a teacher who understands how to develop it. That little teacher, who had only a second-class certificate, knew more about psychology, than many of the greatest men, who preside over great institutions. Some years ago, Professor Slayton, a native of Brighton, England, was in the Alps. He was one of the best botanists in the country. His wife died, and he was left with a child between 5 and 6 years old. They were staying at the Hotel des Alpes, in the valley of Chamonix. One morning he took his daughter to the Mer de Glace, and told her to run back to the hotel, that he would be back in the afternoon. The girl said goodbye to her father, watched him climb Mont Blanc into the forest, and ran back. In the evening he did not return, and she spent the night awake, worried. Early in the morning, she ran out of the hotel and went up the creek, to the path she had seen her father take. Then, running, she began to climb the slope of the great snow-capped mountain. He came suddenly to a place, where the path ran along an overhanging precipice, 280 feet perpendicular, around a promontory of rock, which lay a few yards behind. When he reached that place, his feet slipped on the snow on the glistening ice. And he slid down and over the edge to such an extent that his toes caught in the moss on the edge, and one foot rested on an inch or so of rock ledge. As he dangled he shouted, "Dad!" His father heard the cry. He was so far down in the valley that he could not see her, but he heard her voice. He recognized it and felt he needed it. Humanity was calling him. He ran across the valley and up the path. Along the way there was a tree nearby, which he had noticed. There was an axe. He pulled out the axe and ran to a tree, where he had noticed that there was a rope, which the charcoal burners had used for a long time, to lower the coal from the cliff. He cut the rope with the axe, threw the axe away and, tying the rope as he had seen the guides do, who took the travelers down the sea of ice, he kept running, until he reached the place where his little daughter had slipped. He could see the streak of her hair 20 feet down, and it was all dazzling ice. His heart must have stopped beating, but suddenly he cried out, "Daddy's come! Hold on tight!" She screamed, "I can't hold on any longer." He turned and threatened her. "Oh, parents, whoever you are, you can save your own son or daughter from physical or moral death by teaching them to obey when they are young." His fingers tightened again, and he drew the rope around the butt of a tree he had observed, and dropped quickly on that ice. He tried to grab his little daughter's hands, but they had melted deep into the moss, and he dropped down beside her, grabbed her by the dress, and pulled her to himself. They both hung over the edge of the cliff, and the end of the rope was in her hand, and his hand on the ice. He tried to pull himself up, but the rope wouldn't budge a millimeter, and then he tried to push his little daughter up, but with icy fingers, he couldn't climb up. There they hung in the Alps, alone. Will he fall over the steep rocks and be crushed to death? No, he will not fall, for he is a king. He had made use of his daily observation, although he is a university graduate. He had noticed something else. He had observed how dogs howl when they meet perishing travelers. Those street Bernard dogs, whenever they find a corpse or a man lying insensible, howl in a peculiar way. Those dogs know more about acoustics than an architect. How do they know? God told them. When a dog emits that howl, it can be heard for miles and miles away. The professor imitated the dog's call, and when it rang out across the valley, the charcoal burners and lumberjacks heard it. They said, "That is a dog, and a dog never howls like that, unless he has found a dying man." So, throwing down their axes and weapons, and running over the snow towards the sound of the call, they came suddenly to the spot. They seized the rope, and one of them quickly slid down, and seized the girl's arm and pulled her up. Then he grabbed the teacher's arm and pulled him up, while the others pulled on the rope. In this way they dragged him upwards. The professor fell on the snow, and fainted. But he was a king. He heard the cry of humanity, and when he heard it, he knew where the axe was. He had used his daily study in such a way, that he knew where the old rope was, and he knew how to tie it, and he knew how to call for help. Whenever you find on earth a successful man or woman, you will see that it is a man or woman who hears the call of humanity. One who has so used his daily means of observation that he knows where are the weapons with which to fight those battles, or where are the means with which to bring relief to men. I could not better express in their minds the feelings of that professor than by a quotation from an English phrase, which he printed in English in his scientific books, although the books were published in French. "We live for those who love us, for those who really know us, for the heavens that are bending over us, and the good we can do. For the evils that have no endurance, for every cause that needs help, for the future that looms in the distance, for the good we can do."
As we conclude this audiobook journey through The Key to Success by Russell H. Conwell, may the wisdom imparted within these chapters resonate deeply within you. Remember, success is not merely a destination, but a journey fueled by determination, perseverance, and unwavering belief in oneself. Apply the principles learned here diligently, and watch as your aspirations transform into reality. Thank you for joining us on this enlightening expedition. Wishing you boundless success and fulfillment in all your endeavors. Until we meet again, keep striving, keep believing, and keep unlocking the doors to your dreams. Farewell, and may your path be forever illuminated by the key to success.